I'm Mike Alvarez. I'm a professor of political and computational social science here at Caltech. I'm also one of the co-directors of the Lynn Center for Science, Society, and Policy, one of the co-sponsors of this event. Alex Halsey is going to talk about some of the research that he and I and Rancy Clark and some others in our research group are doing. But before I turn it over to Alex, did want to say two quick things. The first is that the point of the Lynn Center here at Caltech is to facilitate these kind of conversations. And we're very excited that you all came to campus today, and really excited that we can establish with you all that, there's actually a lot of interesting research here at Caltech that we hope is useful and meaningful to you all in the work that you're doing. This goes to the question that you asked earlier. Can we help you find the research? Yes, we can. So think of us as contacts in this space for the research that's going on at Caltech, and for anything that we can do to help you all in the work that you're doing. Sarah can help with that. Jennifer Torres in the back, who's one of the co-sponsors, can be a point of contact. And Neil Fromer, the RSI, another co-sponsor, is a point of contact here. So thank you for coming to campus and listening to some of the work that's going on. Now, what's going on with the public in terms of AI and AI data centers is fascinating. I've been studying politics and public opinion and public policy for over 3 decades. This is one of the most fascinating issues that has come up in my entire career. The speed with which the technology is evolving, but also the speed with which the attitudes of Americans are evolving is just nothing short of remarkable. We've seen the public obviously shift into I think a place where they don't like AI data centers. Trying to understand why that's happened and what that shift entails is really something that our research group has really started to try to tackle. So with that, I'll just shift it over to Alex.
Thank you for the introduction, Mike. And yeah, today I'll be talking, hopefully I'll keep it short and sweet because I know everybody wants to get to lunch, but I'll be talking about why voters dislike data centers. So I want you all to leave with 3 takeaways from this talk. The number one thing we see very consistently in our polling is that voters are most concerned about the impacts of data centers on their utility bills. That's probably not surprising to many of you, given your work and also the presentations that you've seen here today. Another thing we've seen with some experiments we've done is that some voters are receptive to hearing about potential fiscal benefits of data centers. We found that about 10 to 15% of voters change their minds on banning data centers if you give them sort of optimistic information about potential benefits of data centers to their community. And the final takeaway is that we see kind of an emerging cleavage in this data, which is that users of AI and sort of believers in the technology are much more likely to support data center construction and be persuaded of its benefits than sort of the broader public. Okay, before I go into more detail on all of that, I just want to spend a little bit of time discussing our survey methods because this is very important to understand what we're doing and also for you to have confidence in what we're measuring. So we use YouGov for all of our surveys. It's, I would say seen as the gold standard in this sort of public opinion research. They do a really good job of recruiting a balanced sample of participants. They do a lot of quality control and all that sort of thing, so we feel really good about the quality of data we're getting from YouGov. This particular survey that I'm going to be talking about was about 2,200 registered voters. We conducted it in March, so just a few months ago. So this is a nationally representative survey. Of course, our 2,200 voters aren't going to be a perfect subset of the American voting population, and so we weight that to census benchmarks. So what that means is if a certain age group or demographic is slightly under or overrepresented, we basically multiply their observations by an adjustment factor to make this match the national population as much as we can. All of our survey work is approved by the Caltech Institutional Review Board. Like I said, we do a lot of quality control. One of the main things we do is we sort of slip in questions into the survey where we say, ignore everything you just read and select A, to make sure that people are actually reading the questions and they're not just ripping through the survey. And also, survey participants are compensated by YouGov. And finally, we pre-register all of our surveys on the Open Science Foundation. That's sort of social science-wide practice to ensure that we're not data mining our surveys or sort of using the data to fit, pre-baked conclusions or anything like that. In this particular survey, what we did is we collected baseline attitudes towards climate and climate change, renewable energy, AI, and data centers. And then I'll also present results from this same survey about a randomized experiment to evaluate how voters respond to potential fiscal benefits of data centers. So here are some baselines from the survey. So looking at this figure, green, it kind of varies by question, but think of green as like support and positive and red as negative. So you can see how various things poll here. So starting at the top, we just have what is your level of support for building a hyperscale data center in your county? And we can see that 32% support, 20% are neutral, and 48% oppose. So I think that breakdown won't be very surprising to most of you. We also ask to what extent voters support a moratorium on hyperscale data centers. And you can see that 35% would support a moratorium at the national level, all the way down to 51% would support a moratorium in their own county. What's also interesting about this moratorium question is how many voters are sort of undecided or unsure about this. So you can see that at the national level, 45% are unsure, and even at the county level, 31% don't know yet whether or not they want their county to ban these data centers. It's also, I'm not going to touch on the rest of this as much during the talk, but I think this is interesting in the broader context of this issue. So we collect a lot of data on how AI is polling and how renewable energy and other sources of energy are polling. And I think these tell a really interesting story. So you can see that people are sort of unsure to pessimistic about AI's impact on the US. People feel this 47% versus 11% AI in daily life. This was, concerned versus excited. So, 4 times as many people are concerned about the expanded use of AI as are excited about it, despite the fact that 50% of people are impressed by AI's capabilities compared to 30% not impressed. And finally, you can see some of our numbers about expanding US energy sources. So there's a lot of optimism and support for renewable energy. People are kind of split on offshore oil and gas and slightly negative on expanding coal mining. So broadly, we can see that there's sort of pessimism around AI and data centers and optimism around renewable energy. So now drilling into data center concerns specifically, we asked our respondents to select one major concern about building a local data center, and this is kind of one of our main findings, is that electricity rates and blackouts are the primary concern, with 47% of our sample listing that as their number one concern. We also see a lot of people cite water rates and shortages. I think, 27% also shouldn't be surprising, given Adam's talk right before me. And then, to a lesser extent, people cite groundwater contamination, noise and traffic, and only 8% of people say they have no concerns. So I think this is interesting that at least, over the past couple months and over the past few years, I've seen a lot in the news about water use, but throughout this survey and throughout other work we've done, we consistently see that electricity costs and grid reliability is the number one concern for voters. And I think this makes sense in the context of sort of broader economic headwinds. In this survey we did, 84% of respondents reported that they suffered from high energy bills in the last year. So this is a very pressing sort of pocketbook concern for voters. Okay, next I want to walk through our experiment for how people respond to informational treatments about potential benefits of data centers. So I want you to think of this experiment as basically, if we present voters with optimistic evidence about how data centers may or may not affect their own finances, does that affect the way they view them? So we randomly assign participants to one of 3 escalating treatments. This random assignment ensures that what we find, the results we find are due to the different treatments, not due to underlying differences in who got sorted into what group. So everybody sees this message about Loudoun County. So I think Loudoun County has come up a few times today. It has the highest number of data centers in the US. And what we present to survey participants is this evidence that the county has been able to reduce homeowner property taxes by 0.4%, leading to a saving of about $3,000 a year per homeowner. So the idea being, look, perhaps allowing data centers to be built in your county could save you a lot of money on your property taxes. So everybody saw this message. Then 2/3 saw an additional message after this, which said that data centers now account for more than 21% of the county's electricity consumption. Despite this large demand, electricity rates in Virginia have remained below the national average since 2010. So this is saying, look, there's this place in Virginia, they've built a bunch of data centers, and despite that, electricity rates have not necessarily gone up dramatically. And finally, we show a third, this final sentence that says, basically, there's other states, such as Maine, that haven't built any data centers where residential electricity rates are high. So the point of this is just to say it's possible for you to build data centers for them to have a positive fiscal impact on your community without your electricity bills necessarily suffering. And so what we really wanted to see is how do voters perceive these trade-offs? So walking through, this figure kind of summarizes the results. So the gray bar is sort of that first sentence, just about property tax savings. The orange bar is about what we see when we also tell people that there hasn't been necessarily a huge increase in electricity rates from the expansion of data centers in this county. So just telling people about property tax savings does lead to a decline in support for a national ban on data centers of about 10 percentage points, but it doesn't really affect support for a county ban or support for a local data center. However, when we tell people that perhaps your electricity rates might not have to go up because of this data center, then we see support for a county ban decrease by 10 percentage points, and we see support for a local hyperscale data center increase by 5 percentage points. I want to point out that most of this sort of movement, most of this persuasive effect comes from those people who I showed you on the first slide who were unsure on how they felt. So there's, a lot of people sort of have their minds made up about this, and this evidence didn't really persuade them, but the ones who weren't sure are the ones who were most persuaded by this evidence. I also want to say that despite the fact that this is a pretty large effect in the context of political persuasion, post-treatment, we still saw that opposition to the data center was stronger than support pretty much across the board. So even sort of in the most optimistic framing of this, we still saw about 40% support versus 45% oppose, and then still the residual not sures. I also want to talk about AI use because, obviously these data centers are mostly being used for AI. So we collect data on how much people are using AI, and the largest cleavage we saw in this data was about how often do you use AI. So this figure right here shows opposition to a local data center. And you can see that among rare users of AI, 57% oppose construction of a local data center versus daily users, only 35% oppose the construction. And this is a larger gap than we see, along sort of other standard demographic breakdowns, with also the gap between Republicans and Democrats being somewhat notable. We also see that, in the informational treatment, the experiment that I showed you a few slides ago, regular users of AI were also the most responsive to that treatment. So this is interesting because I think, the growth of AI and the growth of data centers are very intertwined issues. And I think that, the extent to which people use and support AI is an important driver in this conversation on how they feel how supportive they are of expansion of data centers. Okay, so just to wrap up, I would say that pretty consistently our findings show that cost protection is crucial. So the number one concern people have is that these data centers are going to affect their bottom line through their utility bills. We also see a lot of concern about environmental issues. We've talked about air pollution, we've talked about water usage. These are significant for a lot of voters. We see that more so among Democrats than Republicans. Also among Democrats, we see specifically they're much more likely to support a data center if it's powered by renewable energy. We saw a significant persuasive effect from this evidence about utility rate impacts. However, even with the size of that persuasive effect, we still saw a majority opposing construction of local data centers. I believe that voter positions on this issue are going to continue to evolve. We saw a lot of people are unsure or uninformed about this issue. People who use AI and sort of see the benefit and the technology are much more likely to support data center construction. So that's something to monitor as more and more people start to use this technology. And finally, I just want to say, the usual limitations with this kind of survey work. So we have a national sample here. That's not going to be quite the same as the kinds of constituents all of you are dealing with. And in a survey, we can only test what people say, not what they do. And that's it. So I just want to plug the Lind Center really quick, and also the Resnick Sustainability Institute, which funded a lot of this work. You can check out our website, the lcssp.caltech.edu. Rancy, Mike, and I have been doing this work for much of the last year, and we've been posting sort of blogs with updates from our findings. And so if you check out the website, you can keep up with this work and also keep up with any forthcoming publications. Thank you.